All right, everyone, by our clock, we are at 10 o'clock. We're going to begin. There's a little bit of echo in the background. Hopefully that's okay. Greetings and thank you for tuning in to the next installment of the Active Transportation Resource Center webinar series. My name is Victoria Custodio, and I'm part of the Active Transportation Resource Center team. I'll be facilitating the webinar today, which is entitled Street Story, a Platform for Community Engagement. Today, we're proud to help highlight Street Story, which is a web-based community engagement tool that's been designed for people to report transportation safety issues they see and experience, with the purpose that informing agencies and community groups with more information so they can have a fuller picture of the transportation needs of the communities that they serve. Next slide. But before we begin with our presentation, I have a few introductory slides and comments. I'll begin with a brief reminder about Caltrans Active Transportation Resource Center and who we are and what we've been designed to do. So the Active Transportation Resource Center, or the ATRC, is a statewide project of the Active Transportation Program and is administered by Caltrans Division of Local Assistance and the Office of State Programs. The ATRC has been set up to provide support to local agencies throughout California with the delivery of their ATP awards, their Active Transportation Program awards. Although I'll add here that the Active Transportation Resource Center also provides resources and services to non-ATP awardees as well. How do we do this? The ATRC utilizes a combination of subject matter experts from state agencies, such as the California Department of Public Health, which is where I'm based, different universities, and consultants to provide active transportation resources that support the ATP. Overall, we provide active transportation training, tools, resources, as well as technical assistance to stakeholders for both infrastructure and non-infrastructure project types. And if you're interested, you can learn a little bit more about our services and what we offer on our website, which is available at the website address on your screen. All right, and I just have one more housekeeping slide. Please know that we are recording this webinar for future accessibility and reference. We'll post it to our website and also let you know when it becomes available. And then secondly, we are hoping this presentation will be as interactive as possible. So you're encouraged to ask questions and make comments, and you can use either the chat or Q&A features. And please note that we will have a longer question and answer period after the presentation has been completed. All right. We have a great presenter today, Kate Beck. Just a little bit about Kate. Kate leads the Street Story program. She's the program lead at UC Berkeley's Safe Transportation Research and Education Center, which we commonly refer to as SafeTREC. Just a little bit more about her. She's also worked on a number of projects that involve finding ways to meaningfully involve diverse demographics in transportation and public health decision-making processes, and determining how traditional and non-traditional data sets can complement one another. And again, I'm Victoria Custodio, part of the Active Transportation team, and specifically working on non-infrastructure technical assistance here at the California Department of Public Health. So this next slide, since we are, this webinar has been set up as a learning opportunity, we always create learning objectives, and these are the following that we've created for this session. First, we hope by the end of the session you'll understand the utility of the Street Story tool. Next, we hope that you will learn how to input data into the Street Story tool. And then finally, our goal is to have you learn how to download and use Street Story data for your advocacy, programming, and planning work. And I promise this is my last slide before I turn it over to Kate. We have two quick polls for those of you who are in attendance to help us figure out who's on the call today. Please indicate in which field do you work. And I know some of you are involved in overlapping fields, but please select your best answer. And then the second poll is, for what type of organization do you work? Are you at the community organization level? Do you work for local government? Are you in a state agency? Are you with a consulting firm? Or are you working in another capacity? I'll give you guys about 30 or so seconds because I see some movement. Thank you for participating on the poll. It really helps us be interactive, even though we're not all attending this meeting in the same place. Okay, looks like we're about 85% finished. I'm gonna, just to keep us moving along, really hope to get 100% participation. So if you're checking your email, maybe you could just do this poll for us and then go back to your email if you're multitasking, which, distracted multitasking, we're not sure we want that in any aspect of our lives anymore, although our culture demands it. Okay, I'm going to go for this. We've got some good results. So in which field do you attend? I mean, do you work? We've got 42% in planning. We've got 23% who are in engineering. Sorry, can you cancel that so I can read that? We've got about close to 20% from public health in attendance, and then just a few who are from the other category. And then as far as what type of organization do you work for, we have about a third are from local government, and then we've got a quarter that are in state government, and then about 15% indicating they're from either a community organization level or other, and just a couple of folks on the phone representing consulting firms. So I appreciate everyone letting us know where you're from, and on that note, I'm going to welcome Kate. Kate, can you just do a quick audio check?
Yep. Hi, can you hear me?
We can. All right, take it away, Kate.
Thanks so much. So I am going to introduce the Street Story tool, which is a new tool that we've developed here at SafeTREC over the last year, and we're now rolling out throughout California. Next slide. So I'll first be going over the transportation safety data sources that we have available to us here in California and talking about how community engagement fits into these. I'll really quickly go over how community engagement fits into theoretical and policy frameworks in terms of transportation safety. Then I'll focus most of my time introducing Street Story and showing how Street Story can be useful in your work. And then we'll go over some next steps and additional resources for you. And feel free to enter in questions or provide feedback in the Q&A section, or send me an email and we can talk about things more in depth offline. Next slide. So there's some really useful transportation safety data sources in our state. One of the most useful is the SWTRS dataset, which shows all of the transportation collisions that have happened in California that are reported to the police. The TIMS platform, which is hosted through UC Berkeley SafeTREC, makes this information publicly available and provides some useful tables and maps and that sort of thing. Next slide. But there's also some really important information about local safety issues that may not be collected in collision reports. So areas where there's hazards or near misses, and there hasn't been a collision that has occurred yet. A lot of this information locals know about, but that information can be hard to collect in transportation safety data sets that we're using. Next slide. So some of the ways that we do collect this information is often with surveys or big paper maps that we hold at community meetings, and we get members of the public to come and provide their information about these safe and unsafe locations in their areas. These techniques are really helpful, but they can also be really time intensive for those organizing the activities. So making sure that the activities fit the needs of the community, hosting these events, and then also on the back end in terms of processing the data and making sure it's useful in the safety work that we do. It can also be really time intensive and resource intensive for the members of the public, needing to know where these events are being held, maybe having to sit through some meetings and that sort of thing in order to provide their feedback. Next slide. So community engagement is also a really important piece of Vision Zero and safe systems approaches. It's one way to make sure that we're meaningfully involving people in the decisions we're making about their neighborhoods. It's also a way to look at proactively addressing unsafe locations rather than waiting for a collision to occur. Next slide. Community engagement is also emphasized in Caltrans, the Office of Traffic Safety, as well as the California Department of Public Health Safety transportation safety programs. So it's emphasized as a really important piece of developing infrastructure and non-infrastructure programs or solutions to transportation safety, and in some ways it's also a requirement in applying for grants and that sort of thing. Next slide. So Street Story is a tool that we've developed to help community groups and agencies collect and understand information that is important for transportation safety, but is often difficult to gather. The tool is primarily online. We've developed it so it can be used on desktops as well as cell phones. And then we also have a paper version that is available in English and Spanish. The tool is, we've just developed it. The funding has been through the Office of Traffic Safety. It's free to use, and all of the information provided is publicly accessible. Next slide. So I'm going to focus most of my time showing you how to make a report on Street Story and some of the other features. You can follow along by following the streetstory.berkeley.edu link. One important thing that I want to note is we have developed this platform to meet the needs of an array of communities across California, so everywhere from the very urban to the very rural locations. And we've also tried to make sure that we're keeping participation time as short as possible, so we're getting as wide an array of members of the public who are going to be willing to participate. So we've tried to keep the basic questions that are necessary, and then we have a narrative box at the end of each reporting section where people can provide more detailed information. So when you log in onto the site, you'll be asked where you'd like to make a report in. You can either put a city or a county. If you'd like to make a report and just see the whole state of California, you can just click cancel here. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So then you'll be asked to, go back one, please. Thank you. So then you'll be asked to go through the consent form. This is required through our human subjects department at the university, and there is a requirement that you have to be 18 years or older. Through our human subjects department, we are considering finding a way to allow youth to participate, but this is dependent on future funding. If this is a limitation for your organization, feel free to send me an email and we can come up with some ways to think about how to address this. So once you've agreed to participate, and you can click on the Make Report button. Next slide. You'll then be led to a box that asks whether you'd like to report a specific location or a stretch of road or pathway. So for this example, I'm going to pick the point tool. Next slide. So then you put the point tool wherever you'd like to be reporting. You can then Select whether you'd like to report a crash, a near miss, a hazard, or a safe place. Next slide. So then you'll be led through a set of questions about whichever you'd like to report on. I selected the near miss option here, so the questions ask about what mode you were using, what time of year it was, if you know the specific date, you can also put that in, what time of day it was, who else was involved, was anyone injured, and then what caused the collision near miss, or what was safe or unsafe about the location. And then there is that narrative box. Once you've completed all of this, which should take about 2 or 3 minutes, you can either add another location or click submit. And once you've done that, you'll be led through a few demographic questions. Next slide. So that is how you report. I'm now going to go through some of the other features on the website. So if you go to, you'll see this, the number of the 5 tabs on top of the screen on the left. If you go to the See Data tab, that will show you all of the information that has been provided in the jurisdiction that you entered in on the first screen. So where it said, would you like to report in a city or a county? Whichever jurisdiction you put in there, it'll then lead you to the data that was reported there. So for this example, I used Berkeley, California, and when you click that See Data tab, there's going to be some maps and some tables showing the information that's been collected. All of these maps and tables can be downloaded. On the maps that will be on the left-hand side. Next slide. And here's a version of some of the tables that are provided in that See Data tab. So there's information about the modes that were involved, the types of collision, or the types of issues that were reported, and then there's also information about what caused these, or what people think caused these collisions. There's also some, next slide. There's also information about the people who have reported so far on the tool. We ask questions about age, gender, whether people were a resident in the area they were reporting in, whether they have a disability, as well as their race. Then the 2 questions that I think are really important are whether people participate in community meetings about transportation safety and how often they do, and then whether people are a first-time user on the StreetStory site. So both of these questions get at whether we're reaching a different demographic or the same demographics that we're reaching in transportation safety, community engagement processes, and then also if we're getting this, we're getting the issue of the same people coming back to this StreetStory site and continuing to provide reports. Next slide. Thank you. Next, I'll show the other resources on this page. So this is the middle tab on your right-hand upper corner. This will lead you to a StreetStory starter guide, which is a guide that we've developed to help community organizations and agencies think through how they can use StreetStory in their work. There's also a link to StreetStory flyer templates. There's 3 StreetStory flyer templates that you can use to promote StreetStory in your community. Next slide. And then I wanted to focus a little bit on the narratives that we've been getting in the on the StreetStory platform. So we've been getting about 80% of people who are providing reports are including a narrative, and we've found some really interesting information in those narratives. So we're getting a lot of information about frequent issues and also built environment factors that we don't necessarily get to see in other forms of transportation safety data. All of the narratives we keep them private until we've reviewed them to make sure that there's no personally identifiable information. If you'd like access to these narratives for your jurisdiction, there's information on the reporting page, but you can send me an email, and it takes me about a day to get these narratives to you. If you'd also like the demographic information, that's also, I can also give that to you. You just have to request it. Next slide. So we think that StreetStory can be useful for community organizations and agencies is we think it can be useful to complement existing engagement efforts. So StreetStory can be a link that is included on government websites or is shared over social media, but we think it is also really important that it's a tool that is being used in other community engagement processes. So thinking about pop-up events and community meetings and making sure that this is being used in best practices in community engagement. We also think that would be really useful in terms of informing and evaluating transportation safety efforts, and then providing a publicly accessible database for community input. So if there's multiple groups in your jurisdiction collecting information about transportation safety, if it's all being done on this tool, all of that information is going to the same place and can be used by these different groups. If you'd like more information about how this can be useful, the StreetStory Starter Guide can be helpful. The link is right there. Next slide. So now I'll go through 2 examples of how we're using StreetStory in communities across California. So the first example is we've been working in Bakersfield and Kern County for the last 8 months or so to integrate StreetStory into some of their community engagement work. So we've been working with public agencies, community groups, and local media sources to collect community input about transportation safety. And then the community partners that we've been working with are using this information to, in their upcoming planning efforts, which include needs assessments and some grant applications and that sort of thing. Next slide. We are also planning to work in Solano County, which is a county in the Bay Area. It's a mix of rural, urban, and suburban, and they have some pretty a really diverse array of transportation safety issues in this county. We're working with the Solano County Transportation Authority to use StreetStory to collect public feedback during transportation safety workshops in the next couple months, and then we're going to work with them to incorporate this data into a county safety plan that they're developing, as well as an active transportation plan. So at these meetings, we're planning to bring electronic versions of StreetStory. So we'll bring tablets to these community meetings. We'll also bring the paper version of the survey, and we'll work with community members to input information into the StreetStory database. We'll also work with local community groups and organizations to spread the link online and that sort of thing. One thing that I forgot to mention, in Kern County, we held a really interesting event in a public library where we had StreetStory being used in one of the community or in one of the computer labs, and then we also had tablets and paper versions of the survey that were going around to people in the library. So that was a really great way to be in a place where it wasn't necessarily your average transportation safety community participant, and we were also in a place where there was good internet connection and a lot of access to the internet, so we could be completing something like this. So there's some really interesting ways that I think this platform could be used, and I'd be willing to talk about that more in the question and answer section, or if you have some specific questions about your community, feel free to send me an email. Next slide. So what we're doing now, StreetStory, as I mentioned, recently launched and we're now conducting outreach with community groups and agencies across California to help them use StreetStory in their community engagement exercises, and then we're also integrating it into our own community programs here at SafeTREC, and then we're also making some updates to the StreetStory platform. Next slide. I've included some research here about about how we think that crowdsourcing information can be used in transportation safety. We've done some research on this here at SafeTREC. If you'd like links to this, this is all on our website, or you can send me an email and I can give you some more resources as well. Next slide. So here's my contact information, as well as Jill Cooper's contact information, who is the co-director who this project falls under here at SafeTREC. Feel free to send me an email, or if you have more programmatic questions, you can also include Jill on that email. And again, this program is funded through the Office of Traffic Safety, and we've been really grateful for their support in this whole effort. Next slide. So I'd love to hear from you about how you think StreetStory can be used in your community safety efforts, and how it can support the work that you do. We can either talk about this in the question and answer period, or we can talk about this offline if you have specific questions. Next slide. Now I'd love to get some questions from you, and we can answer them.
All right. Thank you. Again, this is Victoria Custodio with the Transportation Resource Team, and I want to thank Kate for that very informative presentation. Yeah, let's kick off our question and answer session. Just as a reminder, we're using the WebEx chat and or Q&A features. So we've got one question to start us out with about availability of story survey in different languages. Sorry about the echo. We're going to fix that. But if you remind us about the StreetStory tool and its availability in different languages to kick us off.
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, the online version of StreetStory is only in English. The paper version is available in English and Spanish, and we're working over the next year to get an online version in Spanish, as well as look into translating it into other languages.
Okay. We have some understanding that it might be your mic that's having some of the feedback, so I'm wondering if we can mute you when I'm speaking and then have you unmute afterwards, and that way perfect. Okay, so if you can scroll down so I can read the question that's just come in. Oh, I'm sorry. Hello. All right, let me get this question. Thank you for your patience. All right, we've got some questions that are coming in here. Can you give me some backup here in terms of enlarging that so that it's actually readable? Appreciate it. Thanks. All right, everyone, thanks for your patience. We have a little bit of technical difficulty right now. Okay, so I've got a question. One is about promoting this resource. Kate, do you already have some basic materials about how we can get the word out on StreetStory? Is that something that you can share with us in a follow-up correspondence with our attendees today?
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. Yes, we have a bank of photos that can be used as well as short write-ups that can be used to promote this. So we'll include that in the follow-up.
Perfect. We'll get that out to everyone who's attending. And just as, just want to say thank you for anyone who's already thinking ahead about how we can get this tool out. I know that there are attendees on this call that represent many different networks, and so our regional partners, our advocacy partners at the state level, also localized, if you can get the word out, I think that that'll really be helpful in terms of collecting, important data to supplement what we know already exists. All right, I've got a question about, okay, this is a little technical. Would it be allowable under your human subjects rules if an adult inputted the data on behalf of youth? For example, an in-person engagement activity where youth share data and then the adult actually inputs it.
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is it would need to it would take a couple of weeks to allow that to happen, but it would be it would take a couple of weeks to allow for that, but it would be doable.
Okay, great. And I think that again, and you've already talked about this, Kate, ensuring that youth, the experiences of youth are also represented, since we know that they tend to rely more consistently on active transportation for their purpose, for their mobility needs. I think that would really be wonderful. And then it sounds like once you have those protocols in place, it would be, you could use it for other communities that have, maybe could use that same arrangement. All right. So, question about just the technical aspect of the data. How long before an entry shows up on the map? There was, somebody has been toying around with your tool, and they want to know, what's the turnaround time for data to actually appear on a map, and then how. This is a two-part question. How can advocates get their local jurisdictions' narratives?
So the information should show up right away. There is last week we were doing some updates to the site, so there was an issue with some reports. I think 5 reports were lost last week, but now the updates are complete and that problem has been solved. If you'd like to contact me individually about that missing report, please do. So the information should be on the map right after you've submitted the report. So I think that could be a really useful way of doing community engagement in terms of getting people to report and showing the map before people have put in information and then showing it after. It can be real-time feedback for the participants. Your second question, how can advocates get their local jurisdictions narratives? Just send me an email. It takes me about a day to review the narratives and get them out to you.
Thank you. And all the patience on your end for our flipping slides gives you something to look at as Kate answers some of the questions. No, if we could go to the chat feature, I could read some of these. I have a question. Has StreetStory been used by resident neighborhood councils to plan transportation improvements in their areas rather than through a process led by city staff or consultants? Do you know if that's been, Kate?
We've worked with community groups. We haven't specifically worked with the neighborhood council, but I think that it would be a great tool to be using with that kind of group. Great
ideas. And again, if you're planning to do that, and we would love to hear about it, and Kate would love to hear about it. All right, can you share any outstanding examples of how a community or school has used StreetStory to facilitate or identify changes to a transportation system or network at this point?
Yeah, so the two examples that I used previously in Kern County and in Solano County are really great ways that communities have or are planning to use the tool. We're also working with Walk San Francisco in the next month to use the Street Story tool in some of their pop-up events for a stretch of street in San Francisco. So we'll be going on to the street with them, and they'll be doing an outreach activity, and then we'll also have Street Story there in a paper version as well as the online version. Then we're also considering working with them to go into senior centers and collect information about transportation safety issues with seniors using Street Story in the next couple of months. So those are some other ways that community groups are using the tool.
Excellent. And Kate, you do have an interactive website yourself at SafeTREC, correct, where you're kind of highlighting how the tool has been used in different jurisdictions. So as more information becomes available, that's stuff that you post, correct?
Yeah, that's a great point. The Street Story updates are often featured in the SafeTREC newsletter, so if you'd like more information, I would definitely subscribe to that. And then on the Street Story website, there's a tab called Community Stories, and that will lead you to the SafeTREC blog site, where we're posting all of the information about how Street Story is being used by communities. So right now there's about 5 articles about that, and there'll be more coming up in the next couple of months. So I'd go there, and if you have more specific questions, feel free to email me.
Right, and the Active Transportation Resource Center will also coordinate with you, Kate, to highlight those news stories and reports that come out, since we know that the Active Transportation Program is interested in the tool and is considering its application for future rounds of Active Transportation Program funding for the application process. So I'm jumping around with some of the questions. Great questions. Keep them coming. I have a question about Kate, if you could speak more about how the Street Story data is used from your community engagement events and how this input is balanced with other factors, engineering costs, et cetera.
So right now, the information is being used in terms of how community engagement information is often used, which is in grant applications when there's a piece asking specifically about how community has become aware of these changes or the safety issues. This information can be provided there. I'd also love to hear more about how agencies and organizations think that this can be used to complement other data sources. If you'd like to learn more about how we've used crowdsourcing information in the past to determine where hotspots are and that sort of thing, I'd look through some of the resources that I put on in the slides from the research that we've done here at SafeTREC. There's also some really great resources from Canada, from the University of Victoria, through their platform bikemaps.org, and they've done some really good research about how to use this information in planning and engineering efforts.
Great, thank you, Kate. This is something I know we've talked about. Can you talk about the steps that Street Story or SafeTREC takes to validate the data collected through the tool?
Yeah, validation is a really interesting issue that we've thought a lot about here at SafeTREC. So how we look at this data is it's community engagement data. So it's information that the public is providing. That information is very useful in a lot of ways. It's not going to have the kind of validity that a police reported data set might have. So we can't verify that the person is reporting in the right location. We can't verify that all of the information that people are providing is accurate, but that's part of the some of the hurdles with community input is it's really valuable to be engaging people in this kind of effort, but we also need to recognize that when we're looking at a specific report, we need to a community organization or a agency may have to go out to that site and actually verify that there is a missing stop sign or that there is poor lighting in an area. So I think that verification, it's really important that we're partnering with community organizations and agencies who are willing to use this data and make sure that it's being incorporated in a thoughtful way into their efforts. In terms of some of the other issues that people ask about when talking about validity is how do we know that we're not having someone scamming the system, so we don't have someone coming in and providing a lot of reports just around their house or something like that in order to get resources to that location. On the back end, we can see how many reports an individual user is making. So we can get a better idea about whether people are a super user or not, and then also whether the information that is being provided seems legitimate. So if all of the answers are all the questions are being answered in a way that seems like this person has had a real experience. So far, the average person makes about 2 reports per session, and right now we are getting mostly new users to the site, so we're not getting, majority of people aren't coming back to the site and making report after report. So we're not noticing that there's a super user problem or that we're getting information that seems inaccurate or seems like people are using this in a manipulative way, but that is something that we continue to monitor.
Really thorough response. We appreciate it here. And I'll just add in quickly that just as a reminder, I know that Kate in her presentation referenced the TIMS mapping tool, the Transportation Injury Mapping tool that links that actually geocodes our statewide integrated traffic record system data so that we can see actual police data. So SafeTREC also has a wonderful interface tool so that communities can kind of rely on that information. And this other tool is really providing a different type of information, and so never meant to kind of supplant existing data, but to really round out the story. So, and I really appreciate your thoughtful response in terms of addressing the validity questions that we're getting in. And I really appreciate it. I want to just do some plugs. Stories and news updates from SafeTREC are available through a website that's provided in the chat link. And then the TIMS data is also available. Tool is available, and so there's a link to that as well. Jumping around with all the questions, I'm going to look at are there any steps for street story? Oops, sorry, jumping around a little bit. Wanted to know if there are any plans to create an app for Street Story at this time.
Yeah, that is something that we've thought a lot about. what we've decided is apps are very difficult to, not difficult, but they're very resource intensive to develop and as well as to maintain. And so we've chosen to allocate our resources to making sure that we're giving community groups and agencies the support that they need to be using this tool. And we see an app would be useful, but it is also an additional barrier for people to participate. So we're not only asking people to participate, but we're first asking them to download an app to do that. So we've decided to keep it web-based for now and have that paper version available. But who knows whether it's something that we're considering, and we may decide to develop a tool an app in the future. But for right now, it'll be web-based, and then we do make sure it's relatively easy to use on a handheld device, so a phone or a tablet.
Perfect. Good to know. I have some questions coming in about the availability of the data after your initial funding stream is completed. Is this data going to live on for a set amount of time? Is that a question you're able to answer at this time?
Yeah, so we are on an annual funding pot of money, so we do have to reapply for that money every year. So right now we have money for the next fiscal year, and we're looking for some other funders or to continue funding for that. We will, if the site doesn't continue to exist, we will keep this data, and it will continue to be accessible for jurisdictions if they request it from us.
Great. And I guess that kind of relates to the question about how many years of data will be available or saved. Feel like
that's another. Oh, sorry. That's another good question. Right now, we're going to keep all of the information that is put onto the platform at least for 5 years, is I think what we've discussed internally. But at this point, it's not something that we've put a huge amount of thought into. I think that'll be something that we make decisions about in the next couple of years.
Excellent. All right. Let's see. So if you've got more questions, keep on entering them into our chat or question and answer features. So I want to follow up on a question about using tablets. Does the platform work well on tablets, and have your partners had success collecting the surveys while tabling at community events?
Yeah, we've used the tablets quite a bit to make reports, and there hasn't been any issues. The tool is developed to be used on desktops, tablets, or phones. We've used it with some community partners, and they haven't had an issue either. So it seems like it's working for us right now. If there's if you've noticed that there's an issue using it on a tablet, please let us know, because that's definitely something we want to address.
Perfect. Okay, great. Let's see. Is there a way, and we really appreciate Linda Peterson providing some of these links. We do have a question about the availability of the template for the paper survey, just for those that are for Abigail, who asked that earlier. Maybe if Lisa can provide that link, that would be great. And I just want to also remind folks that we will be doing a post-webinar correspondence and sharing a link to the Street Story tool and the guides that Kate covered as part of her presentation. So if we don't get it here today in the chat from our friends at SafeTREC, we will make sure that you have that after the webinar. I don't really understand this question, but I'm going to ask it for you, and maybe we can get some clarification. so someone who's been exploring your tool has said that the app links to Google. How much programming would be required to localize Street Story for their city, which happens to be Edmonton in Alberta, Canada?
That is, okay, so we are looking to, right now the Street Story tool is available just in California based on our funding, but it is, it could be relatively straightforward to develop a site for a different jurisdiction. If you have questions about that, feel free to email Jill and I, and we can talk about that further. And I'm from Calgary, Alberta, so I would be very happy if Edmonton started using it.
Perfect. Way to plug. And the more that we can share this outside of California, I think the better too. We're all about sharing what we have. So, all right, I am not seeing more questions. Can we scroll down on this question box just to make sure I'm not?
No, there's nothing else.
Okay. All right. All right. So we've got, if we have, okay. So there is an offer on in the chat box about having other resources to translate the survey, Kate. So maybe that's something that we can follow up with you offline.
Yeah, that would be great. We have talked with another organization about doing this, and so we do have we have experience doing this with someone else translating the survey for us. So please email me and we can talk about this further.
Perfect. All right. And then, I've got one more question. Would you be able to provide model language for consultant contracts for your ideal use of the tool for, say, walk audits and other types of community engagement activities?
I think that's one that I would have to answer over email. So if you want to send me an email about it, we can talk about it further.
Perfect. And I also probably have that same question that Rye has just asked here at the Active Transportation Resource Center. I think that might help with the ease and use of this tool. All right, so we've got one more question coming in. Appreciate it. If there's a super user issue, is there a way to take those reports out as invalid? How does SafeTREC do this? Do they make a note of it and leave the reports in the system? I think we kind of addressed this already, but if you wanted just to respond to this question, that would help.
So we do have the ability to remove reports on the back end. We haven't done this. We do review the reports for whether there's personally identifiable information, and we'll take that information out. We haven't removed any reports specifically, though. If there was to be a super user issue, I think that would depend. I think we'd have an internal discussion about whether to make a note of that and continue to monitor it, or whether we would choose to remove it. So, yeah, that's not a decision that we've made as a team yet.
Okay, good to know, and appreciate that response. All right, I am watchful of our time, and at this point, I'm seeing no more questions. I want to move us through a few more slides so that we can wrap things up by 11. So, first off.
Wait.
Sure. All right. First off, I want to thank everyone who's attending on the webinar today, and your feedback on this webinar is extremely important. So I mentioned earlier that upon the conclusion of this webinar, there will be a survey for you to provide your feedback on today's webinar. We really ask that you complete that so that we can know, so that both SafeTREC and the ATRC can know how this might be applied to your future efforts. And then we're also, the survey also asks if you're interested in receiving any additional technical assistance from the Active Transportation Resource Center. So this is just another way that we're reaching out to local communities to know that we're here. Next slide. And I want to end with a big thank you to Kate. That was a wonderful presentation. I feel like we've used this forum to provide, to really highlight this wonderful tool, and you've been just really great at answering all of these questions about the source, the resource itself, and also how it can be applied for all these complex transportation needs that we're trying to address. Kate's email was in the chat function, but here we'll just give it again, along with some other contact information, and as well as mine with the ATRC. So big thanks to Kate. And on that note, I am going to wrap us up. Thank you to everyone who attended our call today, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Take care.
Recording. No.